Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and today I am so excited to be filming my March reading wrap up. So at the beginning of the year I decided to do bi-monthly wrap ups just because I'm quite a slow reader and I never feel like I have enough books to talk about at the end of every single month. But that being said, I do have quite a lot to say about some of the books that I read this month, so I thought it'd be fun to film a wrap up while everything is still fresh in my head and just to make sure that the wrap up that I do at the end of next month isn't super long. So yes, I'm going to be chatting you through all of the books that I read in March, and without further ado I'm just going to jump straight in and start with the first book. So the first book that I read in March, and the one that actually took up the majority of my reading this month, was actually House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J Maas. As you can see, this is an absolutely chunker of a book, hence why it took up most of my reading this month. But this is the second book in the House of Earth and Blood series by Sarah J Maas, which is her adult urban fantasy series. In the first book we follow our main character Bryce, who is a half human, half fae woman, and she lives in a city called Lunathian, which is on a planet called Midgard. And in this world the humans are ruled over by supernatural beings called Vanir, and there's actually a really complicated political system in this world where we've got these godlike beings at the very top of the hierarchy, and they're called Asteri, and then beneath them we have archangels, and we also have lords of the various different houses, because in this world the Vanir population are sorted into 4 different houses. So we've got House of Earth and Blood, House of Sky and Breath, House of Many Waters, and House of Flame and Shadow. Now in the first book we follow Bryce as she is investigating a string of murders that happens in her city Lunathian, and because it's such a high profile and dangerous case, she actually gets appointed the governor's own personal assassin, a man called Hunt Athalar, to basically protect her while she's doing this work. And the two of them basically end up working together as they're on this murder investigation, and they also end up uncovering some pretty dark secrets as they go further into the underbelly of the city, and they find out some things that make them question everything that they thought they knew. I really enjoyed the first book. I thought it was really fun, very entertaining, had some great romance in there and also some great action, particularly towards the second half of the book. So I had some pretty high expectations going into this second book, but unfortunately it just didn't live up to my expectations, and I was actually pretty disappointed with this second book. Now I did really enjoy the setup of this story. I liked the direction that Sarah J Maas took this story, and I thought the prologue was fantastic. It really started the story off with a bang. It really piqued my interest, but unfortunately for me the story kind of went downhill from there, and I found the majority of this book quite a drag to get through, if I'm being honest. I also found that a lot of the things that I really enjoyed in the first book were actually missing in the sequel. For example, I really enjoyed the romance in the first book. I thought the sexual tension was on point, but unfortunately the romance in the second book just wasn't there for me. It felt a little bit forced, and I feel like the author definitely placed more emphasis on the plot and the overcomplicated world building rather than on the character development in this story, which I think was a bit of a shame. The high stakes and the action that I really enjoyed in the first book also weren't there for me in the second book, and I felt like there was just a lot of filler, and the reader was kind of strung along on this plot line that ultimately led nowhere and was resolved off page anyway. And yeah, it honestly wasn't until the last 50 pages or so that we had any action, and that bit just felt kind of rushed. This book also ends with a really big event that I don't know how I feel about. Obviously I can't talk too much about it or explain what that is without giving away major spoilers, but if you've read the book you'll know what I mean. And honestly that ending has me really concerned about how the book is going to go forward, how the story is going to progress in the next book, and how things are going to play out after what happened. So yeah, I don't know how I feel about it, if I'm being honest, but it does have me intrigued. So all in all, this wasn't my favourite book by this author by any means, but will I be carrying on this series? Probably, because I'm a little bit of a completionist, and also because that ending has me intrigued and I just have to know now how things play out. I'm just gonna have to pick up the final book. Okay, so the next book that I read is also a little bit of a polarizing book. People either seem to love it or hate it. I fortunately really loved it, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. So this is a standalone adult fantasy book, and honestly I think this is the kind of book where it's better for you to go in without knowing too much and to just have an open mind, because it is such an experience reading this story. It's not like anything that I've read before. But just to give you a vague premise of the book, this basically follows our main character Piranesi, who lives in this really big magical house. Now when I say big, I mean infinitely huge. Like, to Piranesi, the house is his world, and the lower floors are submerged in the ocean, the upper floors are up in the clouds, and these rooms and halls just appear to go on forever and ever. But essentially Piranesi spends his life mapping out the house and documenting everything that he finds. He considers himself a scientist, and he thinks that his purpose in life is to observe and be witness to the beauty of the house. Now the book is actually presented as Piranesi's journal entries, and we follow him as he goes on his day-to-day life and as he starts to uncover some truths about what is happening to him. I'm being deliberately vague here because I don't want to give anything away. Now what I really enjoyed about this book is absolutely the setting. I thought it was so beautiful and also quite eerie and so atmospheric. I really enjoyed seeing things through Piranesi's eyes, because obviously we're reading his journal entries, so we're very much in his head, and he has a real kind of innocence to him, particularly in the beginning of the book, that I just thought was really admirable and kind of endearing in a way. And I also really enjoyed kind of piecing things together with our main character, because for a lot of the book, us as a reader are very much in the dark. We're just kind of dropped into this world. But what I also really enjoyed is that us as a reader have the luxury of having an outsider's perspective, so we could kind of see things from a slightly different angle to Piranesi. So I almost felt like I could piece things together one step ahead of him in a way, just because I had a different perspective to our main character. So I thought that was really interesting. I will say that I definitely don't think this is going to be a book for everybody, just because it's the kind of story where you just kind of have to go with it and accept that you're not going to know what's going on right away. And it's also the kind of story where you really do have to suspend your disbelief quite a lot throughout it. That being said, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so captivating and so interesting, and it's definitely a story that will stick with me for a long time. My only little teeny criticism would be that I still had quite a lot of questions by the end of the book. Now, of course, the main mystery is absolutely kind of resolved by the end of the story, and it becomes clear what on earth is going on by the end of the book. But I did still just want a little bit more, basically, just because I'm really curious and I really was fascinated by this world and everything, and I just wanted some more answers to a few things. But yeah, that's only a really teeny tiny little criticism really. But yeah, all in all, I absolutely love this one. Please let me know if you've read this as well, because I'd love to chat with you. The next book that I read this month was Gallant by V.E. Schwab. So this is her newest release. It's a young adult fantasy book, and it has kind of gothic horror elements to it. So in this story, we follow our main character Olivia, who is an orphan, and she is raised in this boarding school for girls. Now, the only thing that Olivia has from her past is actually her mother's journal, which tracks her love affair with Olivia's father, and also her father's mysterious death and her mother's own descent into madness. The journal also contains a warning for Olivia to stay away from Gallant. Now, the story kicks off basically when Olivia gets this letter from her uncle, which is calling her to his estate, which is called Gallant. So obviously Olivia is very intrigued by this letter. She wasn't aware that she had any living relatives, so she's of course very intrigued and wants to meet her family, but she's also a little bit cautious because obviously she's grown up reading her mother's journal and reading this warning to stay away from Gallant. Now, in the end, Olivia doesn't really have much choice. Her bags are packed and she's sent to go and live with her uncle, and the story kind of unfolds from there. I don't want to say too much more than that, but essentially Olivia basically ends up uncovering some dark secrets about the house Gallant, and also about her past and her family, and essentially where she came from. Now, this book is definitely the kind of story that you can absolutely eat up in one sitting if you want to. It's very quick and easy to get through because there are quite a lot of illustrations in here. And there are also quite a lot of journal entries as well. I don't know if you can see that clearly. But yeah, so that made this a very quick and easy read. I think the setting and the atmosphere of this book is absolutely the highlight for me. I also quite enjoyed our main character and the disability rep in here, because our main character actually can't speak verbally, and she's constantly having to deal with the frustrations of living in a world which has little care for her disability. I do think this book reads quite young, which is something that I definitely wasn't expecting going in. It almost felt a little bit like a middle grade to me, although of course there are quite a lot of dark themes in here, so perhaps it wouldn't be appropriate for middle grade, but just something in the tone of the writing just felt quite young. Of course, our main character is also quite young, and I did find myself just wanting things to get a little bit darker and more twisted and more scary. But don't get me wrong, there are a lot of gothic and creepy things in here, but it just all felt a little bit safe and predictable to me. And the writing also felt a little bit just like someone was kind of telling me a ghosty bedtime story, and for that reason I just feel like this book would be perhaps better suited to a younger audience and just wasn't quite what I was expecting, and for that reason I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I was hoping to. So all in all, I do think that a lot of people will really enjoy this book. If you're looking for a quick easy read that has that kind of gothic setting but isn't too scary, I think that you'll really get on with this one. I'm definitely planning to reread this book in the autumn time, because I actually think that I will enjoy this better on a reread now that I know what to expect going in, because I think that my expectations kind of tainted my experience with this book because I was just expecting something slightly different. But yeah, let me know if you've read this one as well. I'd love to have a chat with you. Also, how gorgeous is this cover, and the sprayed edges, so pretty. The next book that I picked up is Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shannon McGuire. So this is the second book in the Wayward Children series, and I read the first book last year and really enjoyed it, so I had very high hopes for this one and it didn't disappoint. I did have a fantastic reading experience with this one as well. If you've not heard of this series before, this is a fantasy series of sort of short novellas, and the whole premise of the series is that there is this school for wayward children which was set up by this woman called Eleanor West, and it's for children who have found themselves going to another world. So they've stumbled down a rabbit hole, or they've gone through a hidden doorway and they've ended up in another world and had an amazing experience, and then for one reason or another have ended up back in the normal world and can no longer readjust. So Eleanor West's School for Wayward Children is basically a sanctuary for all of these children who can all kind of relate to each other in that way, in that they all don't really fit in with what we consider normal anymore, and they've all very much been changed and shaped by the experiences that they've had that no one else can really understand. So yeah, it's a very cool premise. And in this second book, we actually follow two of the characters from the first book, Jack and Jill, and this is almost kind of like a prequel. So it's what happened to them before they ended up at Eleanor West School for Wayward Children. So in this book, we take quite a long look at how Jack and Jill were raised. So their mother decides that Jacqueline is going to be her perfect daughter. She's going to be polite and quiet and always wear pretty princess dresses. And their father decides that Gillian is going to be the tomboy, and she's going to be into sports and be into rough and tumble play and wear trousers, and he really wanted a son, but he's going to make the best of what he's got. And so we have these two children that are very much kind of put into boxes by their parents, and their parents are making choices on their behalf that's kind of inhibiting their expression. So while Jacqueline might quite like being feminine and being pretty and wearing dresses and things, she also is quite jealous of Gillian, and she does want to just run and play, and she also has a very curious mind that isn't really being stimulated. And then we have Gillian, who does quite enjoy being boisterous and playing games, but she also is quite jealous of Jacqueline's pretty dresses, and sometimes she just wants to be still. And so it's really, really interesting kind of seeing their upbringing. And then one day the two girls basically find this impossible staircase which takes them through into another world. So this is a portal fantasy, and that other world is the Moor, which is this kind of dark and brooding place. And basically for the first time in their lives, Jacqueline and Gillian feel like they can make their own choices and they can be who they want to be, and they both set off on very different paths. And it's just really interesting kind of seeing what they decide to do. What I really enjoy about this series is how it's written in a really whimsical fairy tale type way, but it does also discuss some really interesting topics and themes, and they are also quite dark and twisted, and I quite enjoy that. So there are a lot of trigger warnings in here, so definitely check those out. And you know, it's just fascinating to see what these girls decide to do, be that good or bad. And there's lots of themes in here of kind of obviously parental expectations and neglect, but also family and love and sisterhood and what's good and bad. And I just really enjoyed this book. So yeah, highly recommend this series if you've not checked it out before. The last book that I wanted to chat quickly with you about today is Neon Gods by Katee Roberts. So I haven't actually finished this book. I'm about 250 pages through it, but I wanted to just quickly chat with you about it. So this is a very popular book that's received quite a lot of buzz and hype recently. It's a contemporary adult retelling of Hades and Persephone, and it's an erotic retelling, so there's a lot of adult explicit content in here, and it's definitely the kind of book that you go into for the spicy sex scenes rather than for the plot, I would say, because the plot isn't amazing in my opinion. But yes, this story basically takes off when Persephone is entered into a forced engagement with Zeus. Now in this world, Zeus is an incredibly powerful man, but he's also incredibly dangerous and has a bit of a reputation for bumping off his ex-wives. So Persephone is obviously very cautious about entering into an engagement with him. She's very worried about it, she's very scared of the man, and she basically decides to cut her losses and run away, and she runs across into the forbidden Undercity, and the story takes off from there really. What I will say is this book absolutely goes from 0 to 100 with the kinky erotic stuff, so definitely be prepared for that. And I wasn't 100% sure how I felt about that in the beginning of this book, because I'm the kind of person that likes to have a slow build up of sexual tension before we get to the erotic scenes, whereas this is much more kind of a casual sexual relationship type thing that happens before feelings are developed. But that being said, I absolutely sailed through the first part of this book. I found it incredibly addictive, and so I'm clearly enjoying it. One thing that I did really enjoy in this book is that Katee Roberts places quite a big emphasis on consent in this book, which is something that you don't always see, particularly in the darker romances and the ones that have more of that BDSM kinky type content, which is in this book. So yeah, I really enjoyed the fact that she talks quite a lot about consent, and there is that big emphasis on that in this story. I also quite enjoy Persephone as a character. I feel like she's got quite a lot of agency, she takes things into her own hands, she knows what she wants and she isn't ashamed of it, which is quite nice to read. And I also really love some of the side characters, in particular Hermes and Dionysus. They both add a really kind of fun and playful dynamic to this story, and yeah, all in all, not a book that I would recommend for the plot, but it has some great steamy spicy content in there, and what can I say, I've been having a fun time reading it when I'm in the mood. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope you've enjoyed it. This is the stack of books that I read this month. I'm actually quite pleased with this, considering how much of a slow reader I am and how chunky Sky and Breath is. Please let me know if you've read any of these books, because I'd love to hear your opinions down in the comment section, or if you're thinking of picking up any of these books after watching this video, or if you just want to drop me a comment to let me know that you're here, that would be much appreciated. You can always just pop a little heart in the comment section, because that always brightens up my day. So yeah, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!